Hello, I'm Morgan Jorgensen, the Donor Relations and Events Manager for the Truman Library Institute. Welcome to The Boss and the Baby, Harry Truman's Favorite Ladies. We have a wonderful program lined up for you today, including remarks and ceremony by the Independence Pioneers chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution, and an exciting peek into the new Truman Library by our very own expert archivists. There will be a 10 to 15 minute Q&A session following the presentation. Questions can be submitted during and immediately following the remarks via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you enjoyed today's program, please visit our website, trumanlibraryinstitute.org, to register for our other exciting upcoming events. We're currently taking registrations for White Lies, The Double Life of Walter White with A.J. Boehm on February 24th at 6 p.m. You can also engage with this evening's content in person by visiting the all-new Truman Library. The library is open Thursday through Saturday, and reservations are required in advance. As always, Truman Library Institute members receive free access to the museum year-round. To learn more about membership or reserve your tickets, now you can visit trumanlibraryinstitute.org. Now, it is my pleasure to turn the program over to Susan Bowman.
Thank you, Morgan. Welcome. Welcome to the annual Bess Truman Tea birthday celebration. My name is Susan Bowman, Regent of the Independence Pioneer Chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution. Since 1985, the Independence Pioneer Chapter has celebrated the birthday of Bess Truman on or near her birthday, February the 13th. A member of our chapter, Jane Mallinson, started this annual event as she knew Mrs. Truman. We normally meet at the Truman Library. However, due to the pandemic, we are doing so via a Zoom call. We are pleased that you are with us today. The Independence Pioneer Chapter, DAR, was organized on February the 26th, 1914 in Independence and is a non-political women's organization with three main goals: to support education, to promote patriotism, and preserve our country's history. We are delighted to partner with the Truman Library Museum and Institute today to honor First Lady Bess Truman. Julie Anderson, Independence Pioneers Chaplain, will give the invocation.
Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to join virtually in memory of Bess Truman in recognition and celebration of a life well lived. Our prayer today is that your will be done through this event, Lord, that you take what has been so carefully and thoughtfully prepared and multiply those efforts as only you can. We ask your blessing on this meeting today, all those present, as well as the lives of those we will encounter afterward. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Julie. Robert Grover, with the Harry S. Truman chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution, will present the flag of the United States of America. The Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States will be recited by Christina Jones, First Vice Regent.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Christina. What a great topic today, titled The Boss and the Baby, Harry Truman's Favorite Ladies. I quote from the Truman Library archivist, Tammy Kelly, from an article for the National Archive. Bess Wallace Truman lived during a time when women regularly wore hats when going out in public, and as a granddaughter of a prominent family in Independence, she always wore nice clothes. Mary Paxton Keeley, her childhood friend, recalls that Bess wore what the rest of us did: The difference was that she always looked more stylish than anyone else we knew. She goes on to say that Bess always had more stylish hats than the rest of us, or she wore them with more style. As Bess grew older and her husband entered the public eye, her style became more conservative. Bess once told Harry's cousin, Ethel Nolan, that a woman's place in public is to sit beside her husband, be silent, and be sure your hat is on straight. We honor you today, Bess. Happy birthday. I would like to introduce Kelly Anders, Deputy Director of the Harry S. Presidential Truman Library and Museum, who will introduce our speakers today. Kelly?
Thank you, Susan. As part of its $30 million renovation, the Truman Library's exhibits now provide much more emphasis on the two most important women in Harry Truman's life, his wife, Bess, and their daughter, Margaret. In this fascinating presentation, Truman Library archivists Laurie Austin and Tammy Williams will highlight some of the most memorable new additions. Tammy Williams began work at the Truman Library as an intern in the summer of 2001. After completing her internship, she began working part-time in the archives as an institute employee through a grant from the Kemper Foundation. She became an archivist on the federal staff in 2007. During her years at the library, she has digitized and individually described all of Harry's letters to Bess and Margaret, as well as Bess's letters to Harry once those became available. Her detailed knowledge of their correspondence and her knowledge as a native of Independence were valuable in selecting items for inclusion in the new exhibit. Laurie Austin was previously an audiovisual archivist at the Kennedy Library for 13 years. She joined the staff of the Truman Library as our audiovisual archivist in 2018 after plans for the new exhibits were well underway and many of the documents and photographs were already chosen. She arrived just in time to help compile images, sound recordings, and film footage for the multimedia portions of the exhibit, which proved to be a crash course in learning the library's audiovisual collection. Laurie launched the Truman Library's popular YouTube channel in 2019. With more than 3,300 subscribers, this channel currently offers more than 500 videos. Please join me in welcoming Tammy Williams and Laurie Austin.
Hello, thank you, Kelly. I'm Laurie Austin, and thank you for joining us today. After being closed for renovation and because of the pandemic, the Harry S. Truman Library has reopened with an entirely new entrance, which is what you see here, and a new statue in the front, a new layout. And sorry about that, I think there were some technical difficulties. A new layout and completely new exhibits. Before we get into all the exhibits, though, I wanted to share a brief video to start today's presentation. And in all honesty, it's really just a sound recording that I've added some video and photos to, just for visual interest. It's an outtake from an interview that Mr. Truman gave when he was recording a TV show. And you'll hear that he gets choked up a bit and has to start over again. I wanted you to hear how he felt about Bess Truman.
Mr. President, would you please tell us about your Sunday school, grade school, high school, Mrs. Truman?
Well, when I was 6 years old, my mother took me to the Presbyterian Church at the corner of Lexington and Pleasant Streets because it was the closest church to our home down beyond the Pacific Bridge. And I went to that Sunday school for years and years until I was 18 years old, to be truthful about it. And Mrs. Truman was also a member of that Sunday school, and her name at that time, of course, was Bess Wallace. And she and I went through Sunday school through grade school, through high school, and then through life.
Got it.
That's fine.
We'll finish that out then. But I got emotional and I couldn't answer.
Scene 1, question 4A, roll 2.
Would you just talk about meeting Mrs. Truman at the age of 5 and you were 6 and along?
Well, we went to Sunday school together over at the Presbyterian Church at Pleasant and Lexington Street. Not only that, we went through school together, grade school, high school, and finally wound up by becoming husband and wife. And I'm very happy that that situation took place. She and I have been partners all through the past years. I met her when I was 6 and she was 5, and now I am 78 and she's 77. If you can beat that, I'll pay for it.
So it's the principle of this partnership that I hope will resonate with you today. When the Truman Library was considering the renovation of its exhibits, there was a deliberate attempt to integrate Harry Truman's family, Bess and Margaret, into the displays throughout the museum, rather than just have a standalone gallery devoted to them. That's because they were an important part of Harry Truman's story throughout his life, from his childhood to his failed business, to his political career as county judge, senator, and president, and finally later, his later years as Independent's first citizen. His name may be on the building, but the two women in his life played a big role in that. And so Tammy is going to tell you how we were able to do this.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is one of the, once you get past our introductory film, this is one of the first sections you'll see in the new exhibit. And that tower kind of that you see over on the right is quite striking. And it contains just a small sample of the over 1,300 letters that we have that Harry wrote to Bess over the course of their courtship and their marriage. We've had access to Harry's letters to Bess for a really long time, but we couldn't access Bess's letters to Harry until after their daughter Margaret died. And we could always make some inferences about Bess and what she wrote to Harry through what he replied to her about, but it was always hard to discern her voice. And one of the things I kind of want to talk about today is the idea that revisionism isn't necessarily a bad thing. History isn't static. And as we learn more things, as more sources become available to us, as we discover more things, we can kind of put more pieces of a puzzle together, and it kind of really completes a picture. And Bess's letters to Harry have really allowed us to get a better, more complete picture of Bess and her relationship with Harry and just her general personality and attitude. I think we make a lot of assumptions about things like that, and it's nice to see some of those assumptions confirmed and some things kind of, wow, I didn't know that. This is one of the first glimpses of Bess's voice that we can really see in the exhibit. This is a letter that Bess's best friend wrote to her on August 20th, 1917. This was shortly after Harry left to serve in World War I. And I love this letter, and this letter kicks right off with, "Don't for heaven's sake get nerves. They're the meanest things on earth, and the only cure is a complete rest." And I know you'd hate, what does she say? She says something about you hate to get that, so do get rid of them quick. She says, "Please don't be surprised if this letter is filled with bugs of all kinds, for there are millions of them under this light." So you can kind of get another little glimpse into life back then. She says, "Do take care of yourself, for you know this war isn't going to last forever, and you want to be ready for a glorious time when Harry comes home." And so we don't know what Bess wrote to Harry, but you can certainly tell what Harry had to say about whatever it is she wrote, because she must have expressed some of her fears about seeing Harry go off to war and not knowing whether she was ever going to see him again, what kind of condition she was going to see him in if she did get to see him. And there's things that you're going to express to your best girlfriend that you are not going to express to your fiance. We know that she must have been really upset because in a letter that Harry wrote to her, he says, it made me want to quit this war because it made me upset that you cried. The worst thing in the world is for me to make you cry. So we knew that she was upset, but seeing this second confirmation really hits home. And like I said, the way she starts off that letter, just pow, don't get nerves, don't be upset about this, everything's going to be okay. So this helps reinforce that. This is the first actual real example of Bess's voice that we get to see in the exhibit. This is written March 16th, 1919. So this is the first letter that we have from Bess to Harry in our entire collection. And one of the things that was really fun to see when we're looking at Bess's letters is she's very big on underscores. Sometimes it's hard to tell whether she's crossing her T's or whether she's underlining something, but there's a lot of places in here where she puts emphasis on things by underlining things, sometimes twice, and with exclamation points and the whole 9 yards. So it's interesting to see that. At one point in this letter, she says, "You may invite the entire 35th Division to our wedding if you want to. It's going to be your wedding as well as mine. I guess we might as well have the church full while we're at it." And you can see that in some of this letter on the right. She mentions the 35th Division. And then she goes on to say, she says, "I rather think it will be anyway, whether we invite them or not, judging from a few remarks I've heard." So it makes you wonder what people are saying about her, what she's hearing about this, and all of her friends getting in on things. And you can kind of hear a little bit of her saltiness when you see these letters. And that's another fun thing that was confirmed when you look at these letters, because everybody always said that Bess had a really acute sense of humor when she was talking with people in private. But of course, you don't see that when she's in public, because most of the time she wasn't talking. So it's interesting to get to confirm that. So the next section of the exhibit is the part that really truly focuses on Bess and Margaret and their role in his life. This has a number of artifacts related to Bess. This has a lot of artifacts related to Margaret. You can see in this picture that we have Bess's wedding shoes, Margaret's pram and her pedal car, her tricycle. One of the fun things about this is that it's nice to have photographs that document these actual artifacts. We have a picture of the Christmas tree from the Truman home when Margaret got this tricycle and stuff. So it's fun to see those things, put the artifacts and the documents and the photos all together. And one of the reasons why, as Laurie mentioned, we really wanted to incorporate Bess and Margaret more into this is because it's important to remember that Harry's life was changed quite dramatically on April 12th, 1945, but Bess and Margaret's lives were upheaved as well. Their lives changed forever. And you can run for president, but first lady isn't exactly a job you apply for. That kind of gets thrust upon you. And how do you react to that? How do you cope with that? There are expectations that are put upon you, and all of a sudden you have to deal with that in an instant. And it's important to remember that it wasn't just Harry that came along on this journey. Everybody came along on this journey. And what do you do as a family? How do you react? So that's the only letter that we have from Bess to Harry before they got married. Everything else we have is from their post-marriage. And this letter is actually one that's featured in our exhibit. This was from July 18th, 1923. Bess is always having problems with her teeth. She had to go to the dentist a lot, but Harry had to go to the dentist a lot too. And she writes in this letter, she says, "I was sort of peeved, for I had made up my mind to have 2 of them taken out today." Then she says, the dentist, says now he'll pull them out the last of this week. And then she says, "Someday when it rains, I reckon, and he can't go play golf." And that's what she wrote to Harry. And so it's like, okay, she's given the doctor what for there. And then it's also interesting to see further on in this letter, she says, I was powerfully glad to hear your voice yesterday evening. Harry must have called her on the phone and they talked to each other. The bulk of the letters that we have from Harry to Bess, or from Bess to Harry, are letters that they would exchange when Harry was at Army Reserve Camp. He was in the Army Reserves, and every summer for 2 weeks, they would go out with the rest of his unit and drill and practice firing the weapons and things like that, and learn more things about the Army and how it's changing. And so that's the most interesting amount of correspondence that we have from Bess and from Harry is during those time periods. And you can see the back and forth that really takes place in their letters. This particular letter is from July 14th, 1927. This one is not used in the exhibit, but I wanted to kind of feature it because this letter really demonstrates Bess keeping an eye on things for Harry while he was away. At this point, he was county judge, county administrator, and she would sometimes go into his office to check on mail or see what kind of things maybe needed done. And she says, Wiley Pendleton and Buck were two of the other county administrators with Harry. She says they were sitting back in your office this AM having a grand time, and Miss Freyer was sitting there with her hands folded. Why didn't you give her a vacation now too? You might as well have. And Miss Freyer, we're assuming, is Harry's secretary at that time. And this is, like I said, is another really good example of her just not pulling any punches when it comes to Harry and expressing her opinions about things like this. She had opinions, and she was going to let him know that things he could do differently, things he could improve on, and people that needed discipline. The next letter that we have that I wanted to feature is from September 15th, 1937. And this one is a letter that's featured in our exhibits. This letter moves us into the Senate period. By this time, Harry was senator from Missouri. And Bess usually stayed in Independence for the fall. So Harry would be back and forth usually from Washington, D.C. to Independence every now and then. And she would spend the fall in Independence, and then her and Margaret would go and spend January through maybe April or May in Washington, D.C. That's the time of the social season in Washington. And so senators' wives, again, have expectations and duties, and they have to make calls and be available for parties and things like that. So she would be in Washington, D.C. for the social season. And when she wasn't, she was in Independence and Harry was in DC, and that's when they would write back and forth to each other. In this particular letter, Harry had a lot of stress. He had really bad headaches, partly due to his eye problems, his really bad vision and reading a lot of documents and things like that. And he suffered from a certain amount of stress. And so sometimes the doctor would send him to Hot Springs, Arkansas, where there was a military camp, but it was also something that government employees could access. And he would go to the facility in Hot Springs and get worked over by the doctors, get tests done, relax. And so there's a number of letters from this particular time period. And this is, again, another example of Bess kind of running interference for Harry and keeping him insulated from people who might be trying to get to him to bother him about things, or just knowing when to step in and when to step back. One of the things she writes about in this particular part, she talks about nobody but Fred Canfill knows where you are. And he and I have been telling everyone you were out of reach of telephone and wire. And I guess you are at that, because they had tried to get a hold of each other on the phone and couldn't connect. Fred Canfill was one of Truman's assistants when he was county administrator, and continued kind of on in that capacity for Harry when he was in Washington. And then she goes on to say, she says, I'm afraid you've been holding out on me. Judging from your letter, which just came, the Navy doctor told you something unpleasant about your heart, and you swore he said it was okay after promising to tell me exactly what the report was. I guess I'm going to have to write the hospital down there to get the correct dope on you. So how many of us have had problems with our spouse not being completely honest about health problems? Bess and Harry are no different. So she's not putting up with nonsense from Harry. So then, and again, this time period is really interesting because you can see the back and forth letters that they write to each other. And so then she writes again to him on September 16th and 17th. These two letters are not on exhibit, but she follows up with him. There was a constituent, Mrs. Hawes, who was trying to get her son an appointment into the Naval Academy at Annapolis. Senators have two appointments that they can make for cadets at Annapolis. And she was trying to get her son an appointment at Annapolis. And she writes, I am enclosing Mrs. Hawes' notes she wanted you to have. Did I tell you Bishop Spencer called up about the boy too? People who are in Kansas City may know or recognize the name Bishop Spencer. Bishop Spencer was the Episcopal bishop of the Diocese of Western Missouri at this time. So Mrs. Hawes was trying to pull all the strings to get her son an appointment at Annapolis because he was calling up Bess while Harry was out of town to get her to put pressure on Harry somehow to get Mr. Hawes an appointment. And then she writes again the next day. She says, Mrs. Hawes called again today and I deliberately told her I hadn't been able to reach you. Very clearly she had, but she wasn't going to give Mrs. Hawes that kind of information. So this is just another example of Bess knowing what Harry needs to know and what can kind of be put off and having a certain amount of political savvy. She was savvy enough to know these things. And then again, she writes on September 20th. So these letters come super quick. We've often kind of, again, assumed, inferred that Bess helped Harry with his speeches. I mean, most political wives do, but it's been hard to find that kind of evidence in Bess's papers or in Harry's papers. In this letter from September 20th, she writes, your speech is very good. Have you started one for the Liberty Women? It has to be on the Constitution too, doesn't it? You'd better pile it on thick for them, for it may be some political strategy they are trying to pull in that Milligan territory. So this letter was written September 20th. Harry gave a speech on the Constitution at the Masonic Convention on October 4th, 1937. And the Liberty Women that she's referring to are the Clay County Historical Society, which he spoke to again on October 11th. And we have those speeches in Harry's senatorial papers, and they both are indeed about the Constitution. But again, this letter talks about Bess being politically aware. Maurice Milligan, she talks about Milligan territory. Maurice Milligan was a federal prosecutor in Missouri, and he was going after Kansas City election irregularities that took place in 1936 and prosecuting members of the Pendergast machine. He eventually prosecuted Tom Pendergast, who was Truman's main supporter in the Kansas City area. And Bess was aware enough to realize that he might have been preparing the ground to run for Senate later or trying to discredit Harry in some way in the Kansas City area or in areas that maybe were lean Democratic but didn't necessarily support the Pendergast machine. And so she was aware enough to kind of say, you need to be on the lookout for this sort of thing. So Bess was smart. She was aware of these things and knew this. This particular letter is not one that's on exhibit, but as in the process of going through Bess's letters again and preparing for this presentation, I ran across this letter again. And when you're describing them and cataloging them initially, you're really you're not necessarily worried about specific content. You're looking for names, you're looking for general subjects. You're not necessarily reading for comprehension. And when I was going back and reading this, I ran across something on this page that just really kind of made me laugh. Right here in the middle of the page, she says, it's colder than the Dickens this morning. I waked up about 5 o'clock, half frozen and missing my heater. And we're used to seeing effusive expressions of affection from Harry towards Bess. He was always talking about how much he loved her. But Bess always seemed a little more standoffish about things like that, but talking about snuggling your honey in bed at night, missing your heater. I just thought it was really sweet. And then this last letter is from June 16th, 1942. And this is just, again, another example of Bess's political savvy, political awareness, her attention to Harry's career. She talks about him speaking on the radio. And she starts off the letter talking about, she thought it was really good. She says their cousin Ethel across the street said it was really great. She said his consonants were all pronounced just as her speech teacher taught her. And then she says, in your spare time, it really would be a good idea to take a few speech lessons if you're going to be on the radio from now on. But if you keep doing as well as you did last night, you won't need any. So she kind of does that, what we might call today a compliment sandwich. She puts a good comment at the beginning and then puts, maybe you could do this, and then another compliment at the end because she thought he did really do well. But again, she's paying attention to his career. She's concerned with his success. And so the last couple letters that I'm going to feature are from between Harry and Margaret. And it's harder sometimes to see Margaret, but this was another gem that we discovered in Bess's letters to Harry. Margaret wrote this letter that you see on the left to Harry while he was at Army Reserve Camp. She was 4 in 1928 when she did this. And in the letter that Bess wrote, in closing of this letter, she wrote, "Don't fail to mention the enclosed letters. They're a matter of great moment." And so on July 17th, Harry wrote a letter to Bess and wrote a separate letter to Margaret. And you can see that one on the right over here. He starts it out, "My dear little daughter." We have a couple of letters that date to just before this. So he was writing letters to Margaret before she could even read. And it's a testament to how much he really loved how much Margaret and Bess meant to him. The last letter that I'm going to talk about is another letter that Harry wrote to Margaret on August 18th. We've had some of Harry's letters to Margaret for a while, but we acquired a lot more after Margaret's death, including this particular letter. Harry had written a letter to Margaret on August 11th, saying how much he's going to need her help on Labor Day in 1948. Labor Day was the kickoff of the 1948 campaign in Michigan. And this particular letter, which is new, he writes about the kind of details of the assistance he wants from Margaret, taking the train from Washington, D.C. to Grand Rapids, and then speaking in Detroit, and then taking the train back from Detroit to Washington, D.C. And he says, if you want to keep on going, that's fine. If you want to take a break, that's fine too. But he relied upon her to a certain degree in 1948, and much more so in 1952. When Bess didn't really go out on the campaign and Harry was campaigning for Adlai Stevenson. And now I'm going to turn this over to Laurie, who's going to talk about some of the really awesome audiovisual material that we have in the new exhibit that features the Trumans that we've been able to incorporate.
Yeah, I wish I could show you every little piece of all of the audiovisual because, of course, I am an audiovisual archivist and that's my baby. But there is a section where their relationship really shines, and that's when we get to the area called Return to Independence. Those people who have been to the library before we renovated will recognize this room as the former lobby, and that mural by Thomas Hart Benton is still there. It's just not the entrance anymore. It's been worked into an exhibit. And so we've incorporated that and this large mural about independence into this exhibit flow, and really wanted to talk about the importance of independence in the Truman's life. So even when the Trumans were based in Washington, they came home for visits and to vote, for Christmas and for funerals. And frequently, as Tammy has already explained, Bess came to independence without Harry, or was in independence without Harry. And after the presidency, they had a genuine desire to become private citizens again in their own hometown. And so in this space, we talk about the Trumans and their ties to independence over the course of their lives, before, during, and after the presidency. We have the videos projected on the wall, which show footage of the family and independence, doing things like their arrival at the train station after President Truman left office, and the dedication of the Truman Library and the various VIP visitors who came to Independence to visit the Trumans. So you'll see this is sort of a wider shot of the video being projected on the wall, and then there's a table sort of in front of it. And so the next, this slide shows a close-up of that table. And so we've got the high tech on the walls, but we kind of have lower tech on the tables for you to just flip through some of these lovely photos of the Trumans, their family, Margaret and her husband Clifton and their children. They would of course come home and see, the grandchildren would come and visit their grandparents. And so that's what this table sort of allows you to get a sort of a more intimate view of that. And then the next slide kind of shows you the other wall and another video projection. And that's more like a slideshow of various photos of them in independence. That picture you see on the wall is Harry holding a very, very young Margaret. But it sort of flashes through various historic photos of independence and the Trumans over time in independence. And then the next slide will show you a closer up view of that table in the front, which is actually this really cool map that kind of gives you a closer up view of various places that are important in the Truman story in independence. And for example, the photos that you see facing you show the courtship. So various locations that were important during the Truman's courtship. We were hoping to work this mural room into something that really has an independence theme. And then the next gallery is really more the Trumans in Washington. And Tammy will tell you a little bit about that.
So this, for people who saw the previous incarnation of our exhibit with the Trumans, recognize this as the actual beam from the White House that cracked under Margaret's bedroom or Margaret's sitting room in the White House and almost descended into I think it was the East Room. This whole gallery kind of talks about their life in Washington. They really kind of thought of themselves as three musketeers. Every couple of years, Harry was constantly sweating where they were going to live. Again, because they didn't permanently live in Washington, D.C. So Harry had to maintain two households, and he was not a rich man, and it was a hardship for them. And so they were constantly on the lookout for an apartment to stay in that was serviceable, but not too much to take care of, because Bess was only there for half the year and didn't want to have to clean two houses or pay somebody to clean two houses. One of the really neat parts of this particular part of the exhibit is you can see the actual White House beam, and then the fabrication behind it is kind of like a window into the old school plaster and lath that was in the White House that they found under all of the plaster and paint and everything else that was in the White House. And the pictures that come out of that are amazing. And that's one of the awesome features about that gallery, is all of the pictures of the White House renovation. And you can see that on this particular screen, and that screen there will cycle through different pictures, and you can zoom in and zoom out. It's amazing. If you when you get the chance to come to the library, not if, when you get the chance to come to the library, make sure you spend some time with that, because it's a really neat feature.
And I just love how it's Margaret's piano that
Yes.
ends up going through the floor, and it sort of prompting the whole renovation.
It was Margaret's piano, and as Harry wrote in a letter to her, thankfully it wasn't him in the bathtub. Well, and I think the letter that he writes, he actually might have said some DAR ladies in the East Room or something while he was in the bathtub. So yeah, it could have been worse.
Well, I wanted to show you one last video that's a little less than 5 minutes, so do bear with us a little bit. It is a compilation of things that I hope will show you the various aspects of Bess and Margaret's lives while Harry Truman was president. Of course, First Lady is an unelected position with no job description, but there are always expectations placed upon her. And so here we see the more official things mixed in with the more private, and we end with a story that reveals just how successful or not they were with returning to private life and independence. It also, I think, gives us a little taste of Bess's humor. So let me share the screen here and we will start the video.
Mrs. Truman makes her first public appearance since becoming the First Lady at Washington Airport, where she is to christen 2 service transport planes as a part of the war loan drive. The planes were bought with Congressional Club bond sales. The First Lady gives the bottle a lusty swing, and with a little help, the plane is duly christened. The big ships are fitted for the evacuation of wounded. More bonds mean more planes.
Miss Margaret Truman's souvenir, she says, sir, of the 1948 campaign, she puts it much better than this, but essentially this, my father and I didn't even have to talk about whether I was going on the campaign train or not. We have that very special kind of understanding that I knew I was going to go. Would you tell us about that, sir? Not as an answer to a question, but about Miss Margaret and the 1948
Margaret
campaign.
is my only child, and she knew very well in 1948 that she and her mother would have to go with the old man on the campaign, and she was ready, and she went. She made it wonderful.
She surely did. How did Mrs. Truman feel about going on the campaign? Did she enjoy campaigning?
Oh, she had a good time, and she wanted to see the old man elected.
Margaret Truman, the president's daughter, receives a degree of Bachelor of Arts from George Washington University. It is presented by Dr. Cloyd Heck Marvin with an assist from the president, who is himself receiving a Doctor of Laws degree.
So thank you so much for joining us today for the Bess Truman Tea. And I've tried to keep up with a few of your questions in the chat, but there are a couple that I definitely couldn't answer that Tammy was probably more likely to answer. So please do submit questions if you have them.
That's right. Thank you, Tammy and Laurie, both so much, and everyone who joined us from the DAR for a truly wonderful presentation. If you have any questions and haven't added them to the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, please go ahead and do so now. You can also like a question that's already been submitted that you would like to see answered. And like Laurie said, we already have some queued up here. So Stephen asks, oh gosh, I lost my Stephen question. It moved. I apologize. Here we go. Did any members of the Truman family have any reaction to the movie Guarding Tess, loosely based on Mrs. Truman?
Not that I know of. I don't remember right offhand when that came out. Margaret was still alive, I'm pretty sure. I don't know. Not that I know of.
Okay.
But
we've got another question. Oh, go ahead. Another question from Stephen, who asks, did Mrs. Truman have any relationship or comments about first ladies who served after her, such as Mrs. Nixon?
I know she probably I know she had correspondence with Lady Bird Johnson. Partly that's due to Harry's close relationship with LBJ. So I mean, she certainly had a cordial relationship with all of the first ladies. I mean, it's, as Harry kind of said once about when he was corresponding with former President Herbert Hoover, it's a very exclusive trade union. There's not a whole lot of former first ladies in the club. So you kind of have to band together, so to speak. And she would get birthday cards or Christmas cards, anniversary cards from some of the former first ladies, but it's not, I don't think they regularly corresponded or talked on the phone or anything like that.
All right, our next question is from Jeff, who asks, why was the Truman balcony built?
Good question. Partly because before that time period, they had these really unsightly awnings that they would put over the windows on the first floor to keep the sun out. And they were nasty looking, and of course, I mean, awnings and things like that, they get worn out. You have to constantly replace them. And I think, according to Harry, there was originally supposed to be a balcony there, and they just never built it. And so he thought, well, build it. That's what Thomas Jefferson had originally that's what they had originally conceived, was the balcony being there, and it just never got done. And everybody threw a fit because by then the White House was a thing and you didn't change the thing. So from what I recall, that was the prime motivator.
Excellent.
And Laurie has pictures of the awnings, and they are ghastly.
Oh, they are hideous. They are hideous.
All right, our next question is from Richard, who asks, did Harry celebrate both Bess's birthday and Valentine's, or did he combine them into one celebration?
As somebody whose birthday and Christmas are frequently combined, I think he tried to celebrate them separately. We don't have a lot of cards and things like that. Maybe I know he exchanged cards. I mean, he would send her a Valentine's Day card, and he would usually send her a letter on her birthday if they weren't together. And he would send her something for Valentine's Day and something for her. He would send her a card probably for Valentine's Day and then her a gift for her birthday. But I think he did try and keep them separate. And it was, I mean, this is a hard week because it's Valentine's Day and Bess's birthday, and Margaret's birthday is in 2 days. So he gets all his holidays knocked out in 1 week.
All right, our next question comes from Thomas, who asks, were the cousins across the street, I think that are referenced in that last video you showed, Laurie, Bess's family?
I think she's referring to the Nolans across the street.
Those are Harry's cousins.
Mm-hmm.
And Harry would stay with the Nolan cousins frequently when he was courting Bess. If it was going to be too hard for him to try and get back to Grandview. Those of us in the Kansas City area today, when we think, well, Independence to Grandview, you just pop on 435 and 71 Highway. Boom, you're done. It was not like that in 1913, 14, 15. It took some effort to get from Independence to Grandview. And if he missed a train or missed a connection, he was kind of out of luck. And sometimes just to avoid the hassle, he would sleep on the couch on the Nolan's house.
And our friends at the National Park Service run the Truman home, and across the street, they also have the Nolan house, which is sort of their visitor center for the Truman home. So you can go into, in normal times, I don't quite know what the pandemic has done to the ability to go in. But in normal times, you can go into both homes and sort of get a sense of just how across the street they really are.
All right, our next question is from Stephen, who asks, was Margaret aware of the very indigent letter her father not only wrote, but sent to a music critic who did not like her singing?
No. I mean, she was certainly aware of it when it came out later in the public. Probably not. And I always try and I cut Harry a tiny little bit of slack here, because that particular incident happened at the beginning of December of 1950, and things were going quite badly in the Korean War. Harry's very closest friend from high school and the guy who served as his press secretary had died like that day. And then somebody slags Margaret for her singing, and he had a lot going on. And part of the problem also is that because his press secretary, Charles Ross, had just died, had Charlie Ross been able to get a hold of that letter, he would have made sure it wasn't sent. Because Harry is very good at what I would call today the Twitter rant and not hitting send. he would file that letter in a drawer. And had cooler heads prevailed and had been present, that letter would not probably have been sent. So it's kind of an accident.
A happy one for the museum now. What a great tale.
Well, actually, no, because if he hadn't sent it, that means it would have still been in Mr. Truman's possession.
Ah.
He left office and
Because we don't have it.
we don't have it.
Sure. All right, we've got time for a few more questions here. Our next one is from Jewel, who asks, what did Margaret do for a living?
Oh, during what time period? Back in the day, when we were showing this video, she was singing and doing things like appearing on television and the radio, but later in her life, she became a novelist. And so she is the same Margaret Truman, that's a pretty famous novelist of mysteries, I believe. Although I confess I've never read any, I'm sorry.
I read some when I was in high school, Murder in the White House, and then she has a whole series of ones that take place in different places in Washington. Yeah, she did radio and early TV. She actually worked with Mike Wallace, who used to be on 60 Minutes. She worked with him for a while. She did just kind of random sort of entertainment sort of things. And her husband was an important editor at the New York Times. And I think eventually she just stopped doing things like that and was mom and spouse.
I will say I was just at the library today and Margaret's books are available in the gift shop. The gift shop isn't quite open yet, but once it is reopened, you can go in and buy and read those mysteries yourself. So, all right, we will end on a question about Bess. And it's about her first lady style. So when she followed Eleanor Roosevelt, why would Bess declare that a first lady should keep her mouth shut?
Bess was a very private person, and she's not Eleanor Roosevelt. And she was not going to do that. And Eleanor Roosevelt, I mean, if you look at the spectrum of first ladies, Eleanor Roosevelt was way out there, way out. And Bess kind of brought it back more towards not complete recluse, but she wasn't going to be out there in the same way that Eleanor Roosevelt was. It's not who she was. And part of that is the way she was brought up. I mean, her father died suddenly. He committed suicide when she was like 20. She had a challenging young adulthood and didn't want anybody to know that or be aware of it. And it was nobody's business but hers. And her job was to support her husband. And she was going to do that. But you didn't need to know anything about her. And that's just the way she was.
All right. Thank you both. And thanks for everyone who asked questions. I am going to send it over to Susan Bowman to bring us home.
I just wanted to thank each of you for being with us today to celebrate the birthday of Bess Truman. Thank you. Stay safe.